Welcome back to the 5th season of Faith and Sustainability, a podcast where we explore how our faith traditions inspire us to care for our common home. I'm Leonard Robinson, your host, and together we'll dive into inspiring stories, thought-provoking conversations, and the wisdom that guides us in protecting our common home.
And I'm Kat Doyle, your co-host. Just to remind everybody that our podcast is made possible through the generous support of Jamie Lanier, the Varlamov Family Foundation, Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, St. Francis Services, and Semco Atlanta. So let's kick off Season 5. Leonard, who do we have today?
Well, Kat, we have Rabbi Yonatan Neril coming to us from Jerusalem. He has a BA and MA from Stanford University. He received his rabbinical ordination in Israel, founder of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development. He's the author of the Eco Bible, which we've got to find out about that. And he's an advocate for faith-based environmental action. Welcome to the intersection of faith and sustainability, Rabbi Neril.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
We're looking forward to hearing a lot about really the way that the Jewish faith addresses sustainability and care for creation. So let's dive in, Leonard.
Okay. Well, I understand that you lecture on two documents in particular that are about sustainability. Could you give us the name of those and what they're about?
Sure. So I talk about books that I've written called Eco Bible, which is an ecological commentary on the Hebrew Bible. And I've also had the privilege over the past 10 years since Pope Francis's Laudato Si of talking about a Jewish perspective on Laudato Si and more recently Laudate Deum.
That's awesome, because a lot of people are familiar with Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home, but maybe a little bit less familiar about Laudate Deum. How exactly did that come to be that you really focused in on that document?
When Pope Francis issued that second document in 2023, I was co-organizing a faith pavilion at the UN Climate Conference in Dubai. And the organizers of the Faith Pavilion invited Pope Francis to come and give the inaugural speech at the pavilion, and he actually accepted the invitation. As it turns out, he ended up not being well a few days beforehand, so he ended up giving a video address. But I've had the privilege of interacting with the late Pope Francis and very much appreciate what he's written.
That second document, Laudate Deum, was really a call to activism, to go out and do something. But let's back up and talk a little bit about what the Jewish faith teaches about caring for our common home.
The Jewish tradition stretches thousands of years, and there is tremendous wisdom within the Jewish tradition about living sustainably on God's creation. God gave us a world and told us to serve it and conserve it, as it says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, which is how Rabbi Jonathan Sachs translated that verse. And so we have a mandate to care for God's creation and not to run roughshod over it or to degrade or despoil it.
You teach about the prohibition against wastefulness and destruction that emphasizes care for natural resources and the biblical laws of land and economic reset promoting sustainability and social justice. What are the name of those documents, or what's the name of that doctrine?
So the first that you mentioned is called Bal Tashchit, do not waste or destroy. And it emerges from a verse in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19, of where the verse says that an army is not supposed to cut down fruit trees in a war when making a siege on a city. And the rabbis of the Talmud about 1,500 years ago understood that verse to be a general prohibition against wasting or destroying anything of value to people. So it's not just talking about cutting down fruit trees in war, although that itself is problematic, but wasting water, electricity, clothing, anything that has value, we are supposed to care for, use it to its end, and then dispose of it or reuse in a proper way, but not just live in a world where we're sort of using, single-use products and then throwing them out and not caring about God's creation.
Would you say that kind of the stories or what you were telling about the wastefulness, those are maybe similar to the parables in the Christian New Testament, that sort of thing, where we're being taught through story and through example? Because the picture you just painted was very inspiring. Is that a way that you're able to help people to see and understand this work?
Yeah, I mean, I believe the ecological crisis is a spiritual crisis. It's not just about the birds and the bees, the trees and the toads. It's about how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. So, it really boils down to certain root issues, spiritual roots, I would call them, like greed, short-term thinking, arrogance, and that there are spiritual solutions like humility, long-term thinking, caring for other creatures, caring for other people. And those themes, those spiritual themes certainly come out in Laudato Si, as well as Laudate Deum, which in many ways repeats a number of ideas that Pope Francis wrote in Laudato Si, because it's really about love and caring for God's creation, and how do we activate that love? If we love God, then we should love God's creation, because God didn't just create a world for us to destroy it. And so how do we bring out that love to be stewards and people who care deeply for the world that we live in?
Okay, talk to me about key lessons from the Eco Bible.
Sure. So Eco Bible is a commentary on 400 verses in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, from Genesis through Deuteronomy. And those ideas relate to, as I said, going back to the creation narrative and to Noah's Ark, and to thinking about Noah and his family as stewards who cared for all species, looking at themes of land and Abraham as a shepherd, and some of the other shepherds in the Israelite tradition. And then looking at, in the book of Exodus, the Exodus narrative and the 10 plagues and Pharaoh as this archetypal figure of somebody who is stuck and isn't able to get out of his stuckness. And the whole Exodus narrative as being a narrative of liberation and how do we live freely. And I think that also applies to our current stuckness in fossil fuels. And how do we transition to renewable energy? And then talking, through Leviticus about animals and our relationship to animals, because the book of Leviticus has a lot about animal sacrifice, and the book of Numbers and about the desert and sort of living in balance with nature, and the book of Deuteronomy and themes of coming from the Jordan River. So there's really huge amounts of wisdom for ecological living within religious tradition and within the Judeo-Christian tradition. And so the purpose of Eco Bible is sort of to bring it out. And then we developed a further resource called Eco Preacher, which is for Christian pastors and priests. And it was written by a Christian pastor, Reverend Dr. Shade, in order to enable and to promote Christian pastors speaking and teaching on this on a more regular basis.
I love that, because you're talking about the Pentateuch, this shared first 5 books of our scriptural tradition. And the stories that you talk about are ones that both the Jewish and the Christian traditions are familiar with and know, those things we've been taught. So I love the fact that you are working within both the Jewish and the Christian communities to get the message out. I do have a question, though. Do you think there is any kind of a difference, or do you think it's pretty much very similar, the way that we address and talk about these issues between the Jewish and Christian traditions?
I think there are differences because, obviously we have different traditions, although the previous 3 popes referred to the Jewish people as our elder brother. And I do think that there's a very beautiful coming together that's happened since Nostra Aetate in 1962, and now that's actually been continued by Pope Leo XIV, in terms of really thinking of, we come from this shared tradition that has the Pentateuch at its heart, the 5 books of Moses, and and we consider those books as well as the other books in the Hebrew Bible to be sacred texts. We have that in common. We have so much in common. And now that we're facing the ecological crisis, how do we draw on these traditions? How do we work together on this? Because, even if we have certain theological differences, but at the end of the day, the other is a brother of a different mother, sister of a different mister. It's not about us versus them. It's about us and them. How do we find common cause? And not just between Jews and Christians, but also bringing in Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and Shintos and Zoroastrians, many people of many faiths who are now inhabiting God's creation, which happens to face an unprecedented crisis, and where we're being called to step up and to really live to the fullest sense of the great teachings of our traditions.
So you brought up Nostra Aetate, and for those who may not be aware of that is really about that coming together in dialogue and communion with our Jewish brothers and sisters in the Catholic Church. And I think that's a beautiful way of reminding people that this is not just about, although it's faith-based and we are called to do this by our Creator, it is just one world. It is just one planet. And we may address it and talk about it a little bit differently, but we're all living on this same planet. And so the work has to address some of the same things. Does the Eco Bible talk about that as well?
Yeah, it does. I mean, for example, the Hebrew word for human being is Adam, or Adam, and the Hebrew word for earth is Adamah. So a better word for human being would be earthling. And so there's different identities that we have. So, we have our different religious identities, but we share this common identity as inhabitants of the earth. Whatever your nationality or ethnicity or religious background is. And that we're really being called now to bring out that commonality, both in terms of sustainability, also in terms of peace work and with all the wars that are taking place on planet Earth right now. How do we sort of zoom out and see us all on one Earth that is thriving, spiritually aware, and sustainable?
What are other Jewish teachings on care for creation?
So another teaching relates to the cycle of seven, which is embedded within the creation narrative. And so you're all familiar with the 7 days of the week and the 1 day of rest, which is an idea that comes out of the creation narrative, that God rested on the seventh day. And then there's also that cycle of seven that relates to years as well. So to work 6 years and then rest on a seventh year, a sabbatical year. Now, I think the cycle of seven and observing this 1 day or 1 year of rest is very important in our world today. And so within Orthodox Judaism, there's a practice to turn off technology on the Sabbath day, not to use cell phones or computers or televisions. And I find this practice to be very powerful because the technology that we have today is also very powerful. But a person can sort of be like a chicken with his head cut off if all the time we're just checking our phone and looking at social media and checking the news and email, WhatsApp, etc. And so there's both a spiritual aspect of resting in the cycle of seven, and there's an ecological aspect. It restores us, and it also lets nature be. We don't intervene in nature.
So let's maybe back up or dive a little deeper, whichever way we want to look at it. How did you get to the point that this is what you were personally focusing your work on?
Well, I grew up on an acre of land in California with a garden with my mother and an old growth oak tree that the native peoples harvested several generations before my family came there. And I also went to a Jewish summer camp near Yosemite, where I first learned about the connection between Judaism and ecology. So already when I was a kid, I understood that there's a deep connection between spirituality and sustainability, faith and ecology. And I studied environmental issues in college and some religious studies. And then I studied in seminary in Israel, where I sort of went deeper into these issues, and that sort of laid the groundwork for my founding the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, as well as for co-authoring Eco Bible.
So that's one of the things we hear coming up over and over and over again, that a lot of people are finding their way into this work based on experiences they had as young people, as children. Is that pretty prevalent within the Jewish community as well?
Yeah, I would say so. And, a lot of young people today and young Jews around the world are increasingly concerned about the ecological crisis. And for many young people and young Jews, the ecological crisis is actually of more interest and sort of motivates them more than learning about scripture or hermeneutics or theology. And so therefore, accessing religion and ecology is also a tremendous way to engage the young generation who are so caring about the future of life on planet Earth and would be very happy to hear that there is there are deep teachings within our traditions on how to do this. And I think that was also part of the power of Laudato Si that Pope Francis revealed to many Christians as well as non-Christians, that there is something deep on religion and ecology that people should really, pay attention to.
What do you think the role of faith and faith-based groups in addressing climate change, sustainability, pollution? What do you think the role is?
Well, I think that the ecological crisis is really a crisis of religion, and that because religion is the biggest NGO in the world, and faith institutions have huge land holdings, media, educational institutions, and the Catholic Church actually being the most in the world with 1.4 billion members. And so I think one way to sort of move the needle for sustainability is through engaging religious institutions and clergy. So my organization has had the good fortune of organizing about 15 conferences on religion and ecology. And we collaborated with the Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia, on doing a conference on ecologically informed theological education several years ago. And that brought together clergy from many Christian denominations and many faiths from the southeastern United States to focus on how can the training of clergy focus more on equipping them to teach and preach about religion and ecology.
So I've heard you say numerous times as we've spoken today about Laudato Si and the part it's played in a lot of your work. I'm just wondering, how was the document itself, Laudato Si, received by the Jewish people? Was it something? Is it something they're familiar with, or what part does it play in your community?
Well, I wouldn't say that the average Jew on the street of Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or New York City or Atlanta is familiar with Laudato Si or has read it. Because of the media coverage of it, there were actually many Jews did become aware of it, and were very aware of Pope Francis. And so, but which is actually not the case with other encyclicals that previous popes or even other encyclicals that Pope Francis wrote. So I think that him focusing on the ecological crisis did sort of open up for greater exposure. And as he writes himself, that it wasn't just geared toward Christians, it was also geared really to all people on earth.
Yeah, and just to be fair, not every Catholic walking around on the streets of Atlanta knows anything about the document Laudato Si either. But I think that it is important to kind of see, as you've seen, that it is very much about what's in the document and what's important to us, what we're living here and now. And it actually makes me feel good as a Catholic and a Christian and just a person of the earth to know that this isn't just about a particular faith tradition, but that the spirituality of multiple faith traditions are drawing on this document.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful for Pope Francis for writing it, and for the others involved who because we need this wisdom at this moment in history. As one of my teachers said, we're living in times that our ancestors have been dreaming about for thousands of years. Everything hangs in the balance. The icebergs are melting, the deserts are expanding, the hurricanes are intensifying. And we are called on at this moment to raise our spiritual level, to live at a higher level of soul consciousness, and to access the age-old wisdom within our traditions for a sustainable planet.
What a great place to end this entire conversation. Wow.
Yeah, thank you very much for being on that journey of faith and sustainability. And we wish you the best on your future endeavors, and also stay in touch. Let's this be the beginning of a relationship and, share ideas. So thank you very much, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. May God bless you.
Kat, that's a wrap for today. To our audience, stay connected with us on social media and share your thoughts using the hashtag faith and sustainability.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review, because let's face it, your support's what keeps us on this journey. Leonard, we'll meet you next time
at the intersection of faith and sustainability.
The preceding podcast is a production of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Atlanta. Copyright 2025.